Alright, so for this video I'm going to show you guys how to install my aftermarket full trigger replacement mod. So for this tutorial I'm using a donor controller that I have. It is fully functioning. It has the original triggers on it. So the first thing you want to do is go ahead and remove all 5 of the screws from the back. Alright, so the next step is a little bit trickier. This is a very important step to make sure that once you remove your screws, you do not just pull the whole case apart. What you're going to want to do is, I like to hold it like this from the front, not holding the blue part, but just the black front piece. Now you'll grab the blue and you want to split it open from the joystick side. So you kind of want to crack it like this, because what's going to happen are these 2 triggers, if you don't crack it like this, these are going to come out and you're going to have to reset all the switches and everything, which is a pain in the butt. So as you can see, I've cracked just the front open now, and you can see how I have very little seam here. Now go ahead and just keep going. Sometimes I like to give the triggers a little push, because what you want to do is you want to keep those triggers in as best as possible, because if those do come out, it is a pain in the butt. Well, it looks like I popped the right one out. There we go. Okay, as you can see, one trigger stayed in and one didn't. This is because I've taken this controller apart many times, so the little hinges here are stronger on this side than this side. So that's okay though. So as you can see, that trigger just went flying. Next step is, for each trigger, you're going to need to remove this tiny little metal spring. And the way to do this is, there is a separate piece of plastic that slides into this trigger. So what I do is I grab from here, and then I grab right where the little cylinder where that metal spring is, and I pull. And you'll notice it comes apart like so. Now, the important thing is to not lose this spring. This spring is very important. So, as you can see, I've recovered the spring. So make sure you don't lose that spring. There's one spring. Now both those pieces, I'm just going to set them back there off to the side. Now, if I had done this properly, or my controller wasn't messed up, let's see if it'll focus up here. This trigger here, there's a little black bracket here. You want to hold your thumb down on that. That way when you pop this trigger loose, this whole piece doesn't come out, because if it does, that's when it becomes a pain in the butt. See, so all I did was rock that and it comes right out like that. So you still have those all there. So once again, I'm going to grab the piece there, grab the cylinder, pull it. It's going to come into 2 pieces. I'm going to make sure not to lose that little metal spring. See? Okay, now I have both my metal springs. Now I'm going to set both the old triggers to the side. Now what you're going to do is, with the new triggers, you're going to take one of the springs. It doesn't matter which side you put these springs in, but I like to put them in the same sides. As you'll notice, there's two gaps here. There's one there and one there. You can put the spring on either side. Certain triggers, where certain people like the feeling, depending on the trigger side, but I'm just going to put them on opposite sides. So one spring is going to go on this side and one spring is going to go on this side. So I'm going to take one of those little springs. Now the way to do this is, you're looking at the inside, the concave part of the trigger, and you have the spring like so. So you're going to want it to go like this. So you're going to stick the spring through the gap onto the little spool, like so. So you'll notice you can see it in there now. So that's how that needs to look. Okay, so now I'm going to do the same thing to the other one. But remember to put the spring on the opposite side, that way they feel even. So, once again, with the concave side, you're going to put the spring in through that little slot and then slide it onto the cylinder, like so. And you'll notice, oh no, I got my spring. Alright, back to the spring. So it's going to slide in that little groove, then it's going to slide in there. Now you'll notice that there's little grooves. See if I can get this focused a little bit better. right in here, these tiny little notches that go horizontally. That is where you want the little spring arm to sit. So you want the spring to sit as close to that groove as possible. So now what we're going to do is make sure we get the triggers in the right side. I just accidentally turned my controller on. It's okay though. So this trigger is going to be for the right. You want the flat side, not the concave side, to go on the outside of the controller, like so. So, once again, making sure your spring stays in that general area. What you're going to do now is, this is probably going to be a little tricky to capture, but you'll notice, here, let me set this down so I can show you. There is a groove on each side of this rubber piece, like a little channel. That is where the spring is going to sit, on either side of that, whichever side you prefer. So what you want to do is take this, as you're putting this in, I knocked it loose, make sure it sits back in that groove. Okay, it's in the groove. Sometimes I like to hold it with my finger while I'm putting it back in the controller. So the spring is going to go into that little groove, and as you're doing that, the two cylinders, there are actually little arms in there that grab on. So now, I really wish I could focus up on this. It looks like so. See, you have your spring in there, off to the side, and you have the two little round barrels that grab the cylinders. So there, that trigger is properly installed. Now we're going to do the same to the other side. All you got to do is make sure that spring is over the little hip there. Pop it right in. Pop, pop. 2 clicks. As you can see, that's simple. Okay, now, next thing to do when you're putting the controller back together is the battery, it has a little groove. It has these 2 plastic holders here, these 2 clear plastic holders. The battery sits right in there. It has little grooves, so if you touch top of it, it shouldn't slide around. It should be pretty tight in there. So now, to reassemble a controller, you're going to want to, generally the way I do it is I do it like this. So you're going to want to put these underneath the trigger and then fold it back down, kind of like the way we took it apart. So what's going to happen is you're going to put the triggers through the holes first. I should mention that I usually like to hold the battery with my index finger, that way it doesn't come loose, because it is pretty important. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pop this down here. Remember, put it back together kind of like that. So you want these in between the triggers to go down first. That way your triggers don't pop out when you're putting it back together. So keeping pressure here, you're just going to pop the controller back in together like that. If it doesn't want to pop down like that, I'll show you why. It's because there's a little lip right here, and that's not clearing your battery. So sometimes you just kind of have to push your battery back a little bit and then it'll pop over it. But there you go. So now go ahead and put your 5 screws back in. Generally what I like to do is I'll put these 2 in first. That way your triggers don't pop out while you're putting the rest of it together. So I'll put those in. Now as you can see, you have your new triggers. And that's pretty much the whole deal of it. Like I said, the hardest part is probably going to be figuring out where the springs go. It isn't that hard once you kind of look at it and think about the channel that the springs fit into. And like I said, you can put that spring on either side of the trigger, whichever you prefer. So if you put it back together and it kind of feels a little weird, like one side's kind of dragging more than the other, then that could be that you need to move the spring to the opposite side. But in theory, they should pretty much be the same on either side. So unless you have a mismanufactured trigger or controller, they should spring pretty easily. So thanks for watching, guys.